Greetings to everybody. A warm welcome to day 2 of Tashkil, the flagship event of IIT Guwahati's Design Club Whitespace. In this event, we invite established alumni from various fields of design to address the budding design aspirants about topics that can help explore opportunities it offers both academically and in a career perspective. Our speaker for today will be Vishesh, who did his bachelor's in design from IIT Guwahati in 2011. He pursued his master's degree in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Vishesh is currently a postdoctoral researcher at Northwestern University. He has done a lot of study on things like the Exploratorium and multiple interactives. He also has a multitude of intriguing projects under his sleeve. He will be discussing the topic design and research, technology, and the social sciences. Let's get the event started. Over to you, Vishesh.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you everyone for coming here in your evening. Is for a vague sense, I want to, who is not an undergrad? Is everyone attending an undergrad here? Can you raise hand or say something? If anyone's not an undergrad, especially. Everyone's an undergrad? I'll take that as yes for everyone. But I also, yes, big disclaimer, welcome people to interject at any point of time if things are not making sense or if we just want to discuss things in depth. I don't have a super tight script or anything to go through. But yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to repeat some of the things. I did bachelor's in design from IIT Guwahati in 2015. I went straight after that into a PhD program at the Curriculum and Instruction Department of University of Wisconsin-Madison. That is, broadly speaking, School of Education, I think, is the useful label there. And most of my work was around educational technology. My current work as a postdoctoral researcher at Northwestern, also in the School of Education, is also around educational technology. I'm specifically in the TILT lab. You should check out the website. Most of the work is not mine, but I like the work that my current lab does. And also, I could have put the link for my old lab. But my old lab is complexplay.org. My current lab is tilt.northwestern.edu. And these are my contacts. I'll put them in the ending. The website projects, as another disclaimer, I've not updated them since I applied for graduate school. So they don't have any of my actual last 7 years of work. The only updated thing it has is my CV if someone wants to see it. But hopefully it'll be updated at some point of time. So I'm going to jump into my things I'm going to describe will be my work, what research looks like to me. So like in my corner of the whole space of educational research and design and whatnot. And I'll end with some of my general thoughts about technology, social change, and design, the things I've learned through my schooling and work here, and what I hope can offer some takeaways for you all to think about, to consider in your journey forward. So some of my key projects over the last few years have been designing and studying a bunch of museum game exhibits. Over here, I have a photo of something I'm vaguely currently still working on called Rainbow Agents was the name of this game, which is in 1 or 2 science museums in the US. We helped design it. The actual making of the game was outsourced to a game development company. And one of the key research questions that we've been studying through like game data analytics, qualitative research, interviews, all of that, is how this kind of a 2-player design can help learning CS-like ideas or concepts in a museum setting. Similarly, building on that, I've worked on designing, making, and studying these multiplayer classroom games. So this one was called City Settlers, which would be played in teams of 3 to 4, in 4 to 5 teams in a classroom. And the idea, similar to Age of Empires or any of these other or tycoon games, The idea was that people develop their cities. They're kind of competing on some statistics, but the thing of interest to us was what kind of talk leads to players exhibiting understanding things about developing sustainability understandings over their gameplay and talk, and how this game can connect to like ideas in science classes and history classes and civics classes. And another strand of my work has been thinking about how to support collaboration and assessment in makerspaces. I don't know if makerspaces are a common term there, but any of these studio-like spaces where there's any kind of crafting things or just 3D printer-like stuff, those tend to be examples of makerspaces. I want to hear something from the crowd because at this point I have zero feedback from all of you. Do people know about makerspaces?
No. So like personally, I have no clue what this.
Yeah, I know a bit about Makerspace.
Go ahead. Like in India, have you seen one, or what? Where have you heard from?
So actually, the firm I'm working currently, so they are developing spaces for the 21st education learning. So basically, Makerspaces is an important element of such classroom, 21st century classroom. So it's a pretty new concept in India, and it's coming its way after the new education policy. So still, it will take time to get implemented. So I've been doing research in this area only, learning spaces.
That
Yeah.
sounds. If you think I could help, I've at least from the US perspective, I've been spending some time with it. I know that 5, 6 years ago, also India had some funds that were happening for makerspaces in schools, but very similarly, even the US, it was taken up as almost like a fad. Like everyone was like, "Oh, this is creative learning, and everyone will get to do stuff," and everyone bought a 3D printer and they did some courses, but then it just sits on the side and it wouldn't make anywhere as much of a cultural impact or like a meaningful learning impact as was expected. And those that also I think seeds some of the things I want to leave as provocations or like space of deeper thought by the end, to be like very often technological solutions fail when they're not thought out deeply enough, when they don't have enough follow up and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in that spirit, yeah, some of the tools that I've been working on, which again have not meaningfully succeeded yet, but it's still like just projects that we're trying to deploy in places, are things that can help see what kids are learning and things that can help people in makerspaces talk to each other, ask for help, create more community. And most recently at Northwestern, I'm working on this project called Sports Sense, where the goal is to introduce computing through sports. So I'm going to delve a bit deeper into this to give an example of how our thinking goes. What are the different things we think about in this? So the premise is that we want to introduce computing as one of the different things to bring about in a sports space. Like one of our ambitious framings is, what would it be like to make a basketball court a maker space and basketball players makers? Is because similar to at least my upbringing in India, sport and people who were doing sports would often be treated as like very disconnected from academics, especially school. If someone was pursuing sports too seriously, then it's like you are likely not studying, and vice versa, more or less. I know I never did sports in IT, but I know that there are some cool people who used to do those things. But I think they're able to bridge that gap a bit better. But most of the time, especially through school experiences, and especially in the US, even in college experiences, that divide is often systematically quite wide. And the pipeline to try to be a sports person, to sacrifice your academics, is even further deepened in the US along race lines. So race and class lines. So black kids, poorer kids will often be told like sports is your way out. If you focus on that, maybe you'll be able to get money. And they often have to sacrifice academics in that journey. So that as a central tenet leads to us also focusing on the idea that when we are introducing technology to these kids, we don't want to make them coders. We don't want to just think of education as something that serves jobs, but we want them to be able to keep doing the sports that they like, but not be disconnected from other things, have a more connection, feel more capable that if I wanted to actually engage with technology, I could do that as a sports person. I don't have to sacrifice on that aspect of identity. And there is another key idea that is very ambitious, but at least my neck of the woods, as we think of it, in our academia and our research and design spaces, is that it's important to have these kinds of ambitious principles when we are designing our projects. But one of the ambitious ideas underlying it is that education should not be just this economic success project. Like, the goal of school is not to make employees. If we just taught them coding, they will not be able to change any. We are not helping change anything in the world. It'll still be like all they're ready to do is work for Microsoft or Google or whatnot. It doesn't change what computer science means. It doesn't change what those workspaces mean, and it also doesn't change what the different products look like, what agency people actually have over products. Like, right now, when we use Instagram or something, we've given up a large amount of privacy just for the convenience, just for everyone to be there. But if we all had like a meaningful sense of we need to value privacy and not just use the easiest technological tool, if that was ingrained idea at an educational level, it would be, one can hope that the technology we would all be using would actually be different meaningfully. So with that dream, we try to think of our project to be like, we try to not draw them away from the sports space, but show technology that can just be exciting where they are. Going back to some of the finer details of what this work looks like, one of the most common methodological framework, I think, is a term we use. In my corner of research, we call this design-based research. So the two key ideas is that the design of our implementation is informed by many different strands of research. And the very key idea which makes this research very messy is that we try to always do it in a real world implementation. So this is in contrast with, we rarely do experimental studies. We're not doing this control versus implementation, like one classroom gets to use this tool, one classroom does not, and then we can be like, this tool helps 10% more learning. This comes from my field, strong strands from sociology and so on, which are very like, they're not trying to figure out a correlation or causality idea, but they're trying to just pay deeper attention to what is happening and what can we do in these situations. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share my ideas around social sciences and social change specifically. So these are some of the different, what specific research questions look like, what things we would be writing papers about. So the first two questions are, I think, broadly usable for anyone in different kinds of design research in HCI fields, in, I think, a bunch of different human factors, ergonomics, like folks also, like, what are different design processes? This also, I think, the stuff that D School does, the stuff that some management schools, I think, also do, is, I assume many of you have seen some of those 5-step design methodologies: empathize, reflect, interview, some other stuff. So that is one kind of research paper to write. Another kind is how to implement these designs. So what is a protocol to actually introduce a tool to a classroom? How do we track how much it's being used, and so on? The more fundamental and much harder, ambitious questions we try to think about are, what are different aspects of learning that we want to design for? So similar to what I just described, like some of the papers we're trying to write about this sports science project is we are making the argument that expanding an athletic identity has value. And relatedly, what even is learning? So we also try to think more deeply about like, what does this identity mean? How can we argue that feeling different ways about your own practice can be an instance of learning? So that's a wrap up. I'm mostly closing my description of my own projects, and I'm going to go into some high level fun day or thoughts. Do people have any questions so far? Or like just general notes or thoughts also?
Yeah, I had a question that, like, what sort of methodology you follow, like, while, like, as you mentioned, one of the research, like, how to design different tools. So, how do you categorize the methodology? Like, is a question like, what sort of methodology you follow? Is it like first you do a secondary research and then you have like a for primary research you are covering like a 1,000 students, suppose, but 1,000 students cannot give you a data like in wholesome that so
So yeah,
Mhm.
that's a good question, though it's very hard to, I think, convey what this actually looks like. For the most part, I can just point you to specific papers to get some example. But there's two layers on which I want to answer that. One of those things that has been surprising since I would say that I identify now as a social scientist. Since becoming this, it's been interesting that like coming from the engineering mindset, it feels like the goal is to have a big enough data that you can say some truth about people, that this thing always happens, or like happens with a high likelihood or whatnot. uh, but that's one of many different kinds of research. And a very frequently recurring thing is, for many human phenomena, especially like social phenomena like education, that stuff almost never works. Like a curriculum that would work even for like 50,000 kids in the US will likely not work in India in any meaningful
Exactly,
way.
that's the question. Yeah, that was the difficulty I was having because the kind of studies are mostly done in US or outside India, but when you're looking into a demographic or geographical location in India, so it's very difficult to actually make a methodology for the project to
So
conduct
yeah,
a data study.
yeah. The trick there, if there's two different kinds of goals you can have. If the goal is to write a research paper, once you write them a few times, they're just a game that you can figure out. They're like another kind of essay writing. Um, Once you have enough secondary research, as you called it, like if you know what to cite, it's easy to make arguments around what happened. Like very often we have papers even around something 3 students did, something 12 students did. um, the specific analytical methods you often use there are called like case studies. Most qualitative analysis are pretty small spaces. So case study is like the most common thing I use, that if you have like some kind of video data or observation data, you can describe a phenomenon that happened and be like, this phenomenon happened around this design. We want to figure out what designs lead to this phenomenon more. Um, and that is like in the broader landscape of research, that work needs to happen before people can do the broader experimental work. So, especially if you're trying to implement something new in a new context, you should not even worry about do I have provable data to justify this. Like you should be doing qualitative research where what comes first, and that's a perfect plug for what I'm going to argue in the next few slides, is what comes first is your values. Like what do you know about what is valuable learning? What do you actually think these kids, whoever you're working with, would benefit from? And I constantly recommend the idea that social sciences helps you articulate that with more depth than you might have familiarity with so far. So that takes some practice to build. But is this the right one right now? Yeah, okay, I'll get to this next. But wait, what are you designing for, and what is a central tenet or value? So some of the things that I mentioned about learning, there's like lots of definitions of learning that are around identity, that are around creation of a community. And then you can also have more easy to parse instances, especially if you're doing makerspace work, like what are examples of maker skills. And then you don't, I don't think initial projects, especially unless you already have big implementations running, I don't think your research question should at all be like, how did the grades of 10,000 kids change? And in my corner of the field, we also are like, we rarely care about the grades improving, because like there's ways to argue that grades are not that great, like a meaningful indicator either. So this jumps into how, especially through my education, I have ended up centering the idea of inequity and injustice a lot. So especially when I mentioned the thing that we don't care about grades, one of the things that, especially in the US, shocking and sad marker is that with like 90% confidence, you can estimate people's lifetime income by just by their fifth class grades and the zip code, the pin code that they grew up in. And that has to do with the US education system is upsettingly more inequitable than India's. In that the schools that you have access to in your neighborhoods are fueled by property taxes. So as a result, the school, if you're going to go to a public school as is over here, which most kids go to, it comes from how expensive the houses in those neighborhoods are. And that has a very clearly established history of race and class. So if you are able to make it to fifth class with decent grades, you will earn well if you were from a good enough family, if you just had the luck of being. And I don't know the specific statistical numbers for India, but privilege like that is a very, very strong mediator. So for that especially, I have been reading in the context of US, and I've also been doing some work with Indian researchers. So some of the key axes that we think about are like gender, race, disability, and other mediators, which are religion is a tricky one to think about in India, especially with respect to education, but caste is a very, very strong influencing factor that we often don't think about. We are never meaningfully taught how to talk about in classes, and IITs at this point have a documented pretty awful culture of thinking about it as well. So these are things I strongly encourage people to think more deeply about, try to read, try to talk to each other, sociology gives us examples of how to frame these as both interpersonal phenomena, but also systemic and social phenomena. So the second list I have of these, patriarchy, capitalism, ableism, are more often social and systemic phenomena. And one of the links that I shared about the justice-centered design framework from Stanford, I think especially has a few flowcharts that talks through these things and different ways of conceiving of conceptualizing them. So just to finish through my slides quicker, I'm just going to leave these points hanging and then we can delve deeper into it as people want to understand. But some of the key ideas when you start thinking about these that take, again, some time to develop, some reading to do, is the idea that do keep in mind to try to understand the idea of intersectionality and the fact that all of these phenomena are intersectional. I don't know if what traction that concept has gotten in Indian social sciences. It has a specific US race history, but I know people who write about, for instance, Dalit women and disabled women. We've been doing an interview project with a few researchers there and also Muslim women. But all of these are like different phenomena that can coincide, and that leads to a different experience. Different kinds of marginalization happen, different kinds of what we call minoritization happens in these cases. So it's worth remembering that these are both separate phenomena and they can happen together. And when they happen together, there's even more details to think about, more depth to pay attention to. And these have been the key things that have been transformative for my perspective, my work, my thinking over time. I regret how much I participated in, like, I was trained into the general looking down on social science or humanities to be like, that's not real and you're not making things and whatnot. But after having done a bunch of this, and I don't know how many of you follow like general Twitter perspectives about AI and so on, but thinking about seeing, especially now, how much visible damage so much technology has caused just because they did not establish policies, they did not think deeply about their implementation in advance. It's become increasingly clear that thinking about these things deeply before implementing them is extremely, extremely important. Making things is not a good thing unless you're doing it carefully. So jumping into how I think about trying to set up this gap, the simplest form of these 5 stages of design thinking, 6, 4, whatever. I think there's like a bunch of different models. I don't know which one any of you might have seen in a design methods course, but broadly they talk about how to define a problem, how to interview people, how to think about it, then designing doing a prototype, testing it, and then refining your problem. I think social sciences helps especially the step of problem definition, and deepens and broadens how you are able to think of it. So over here, I'm giving an example of what unequal representation, and by computing, I mean computer science broadly. But given that as the question, one baseline solution, I say this a bit facetiously, is make developer tools pink, for instance. And by that, I often mean like very often many initial solutions are tokenistic of the sort, to just make it like, this will invite people, this will make it friendly, this will solve equity. There's 2 levels that often misses. The Ahmad Ansari paper that I referenced talks about, the second idea I have down there is, who are the designers, and is an actual voice of the people who are being addressed through the solution, are they part of making the solution or not? So just interviewing and transforming some interview data into a solution you think is right is very often going to have lots of missing parts. It's going to be shallow, tokenistic of this sort. So it's hard, but it's a hard critical challenge to think about how we can actually change power relationships between a designer and the audience as often as possible. And the other thing that, the things that I've been talking about that are there in social science and sociology, is how knowing about the different systems that are always acting upon any of these phenomena will at the very least make us aware, and in the best case point us to better things to do, if we also pay attention to the fact that just making tools nicer or just making a classroom experience better will often not change many other things that are happening in people's lives. This especially in the context of computer science, because inequity in computer science is a frequent thing that I'm thinking about and working on. We know that simply improving educational experiences does not change the workplace experience. There is a whole another pipeline in broadly STEM, especially for women, where they will still face all kinds of harassment and marginalization in a workplace, and they will drop out. And then even in education things, if we make a certain tool or a certain curriculum, who gets access to it? What language did we develop it for? What schools were we actually able to use? Reach. How much does it need computers or some other specific tool? Those are things to keep in mind when you're designing, to hopefully let some of them change the direction of your implementation. So getting the general ideas of it out, yeah, I think you need to think about deeply engaging with social science so that you can sharpen the problem definition and also what the goals mean. Like, what is the goal of representation in computing? And this is what I alluded to earlier, that we also want to think critically about, do we just want employees for Apple and Google and Amazon? um, we are often taught, I was at least through my schooling fully internalized that that is the goal. Sometimes it can be exciting to think about, I will make a Facebook, but most of the time it's like, I'm doing these things to be able to work at a big company. But there's often like deeper things to also think about, like, do we need to be doing computer science? What is the point of doing computer science? Not everyone needs to do computer science. Many of the things that we make should help people who, again, want to use social media or whatever, and be mindful of what privacy means, how to actually keep their data private. And what else? Privacy is the main thing I can think of, but also being aware of ethics, especially when they're using different machine learning things, where data comes from. Translation tools is another common consumer thing that's been criticized a lot anyway. I'll open it up in 2 minutes. I think I have just 2 more slides, but I'd love to hear what other people know already about issues with AI and what people are thinking about. So yeah, before my last slide is of recommendations. So before that, I have this disclaimer that for people who don't know what a postdoc is often an intermediate step between finishing a PhD and trying to get professor jobs. So that's what I'm applying for. But at the same time, I'm also in this intermediate stage where I don't actually know what I want to do. All of these questions also apply to my personal life, and that I'm wrestling with what really is the point of research, being a professor or a teacher, or should I go into industry and whatnot? So I don't know things. I don't know what is the best way to do things, obviously. But my most delightful experiences so far are what I'm listing out here. Like, keep in mind thinking about society, people, cultures, ethics, and inequity. Think about, try to find something that that relates to these ideas in your field or more broadly. Find things that are very specific ideas of inequity, and also then like broader fun day. And also, I personally am a big proponent of recommending all kinds of sources. There's not some objective superiority to papers and books. They're much harder to read. If you can get through a book, if you know of some book that's been recommended to you, do it. They're also great, but also YouTube is great. There's so many commentators, audiobooks, and so on. Instagram and Twitter are also great. You get to see people like real time post thoughts and then change their mind in a few weeks or months. Another strong recommendation I have is I was able to grow a lot because I was friends with seniors. So as much as possible, create networks that are cross year and try to support juniors, and try to reach out to seniors to be like, if someone has had a research experience and if you want to have some sense of what that is, try to do a project with them. Or if nothing else, just get their feedback on some course project you might be doing. Talk to the MTech folks, MTech or MDes or MS folks, to reach out to the humanities department. Those are hard things. I never did most of those, but I think they would help a lot, especially if you want some additional sense of what research can look like. One of the things that was common across my design experience, I think I was strongly privileged in having early access to computer science ideas. So through my design thing, I was able to easily feel comfortable making stuff. And that paved the way for me to get into this. So it's not necessary if you want to do educational research, you don't need to be able to make things. But very often doors have opened for me just because I had those skills. So I only recommend technical skills, not because they're objectively superior or something. Like, At this point, I used to be very big time a technologist and like making things a school, and now I'm like, you should be able it is helpful to make things, partly because it opens doors for you, partly because you can do your own testing and experimenting quicker. But especially if you feel nervous about it or afraid about it, I don't know how much the words would help, but I would recommend everyone to keep in mind, like, it is not as hard as it seems. Almost most of my friends were very intimidated during undergrad, and within like 3-4 years, once they got an experience, they were like, oh, the fear was pointless. So approach it with confidence for anyone who is trying to think about it. And the last few are these general thoughts I assume everyone has probably recommended. But yeah, be open to liking and hating stuff. Trust your own intuitions. It's taken a long time for me, and I'm still very in the middle of trying to figure out what I actually like, trying to figure both in terms of work and also just emotionally. Actually, trusting your emotions is a hard journey. At least it has been for me, because I didn't do much of it growing up. I was just following what people were telling me to do. So it's pretty semi-late in life, it feels like, but I'm now reaching the place where I'm like, oh, I really need to figure out what I like. So I strongly recommend thinking about that, trying to pay attention to your own feelings earlier rather than later. And similar to the acquiring tech skills advice, liking any of these experiences, at least for me, has been significantly made good because I have had the luck of like very good company in almost all things I've ended up. But yeah, if you end up hating programming, 90% of the time, it is likely because either your teacher was bad or someone around you was being mean or bullying or try to make you feel smaller. Just keep that in mind. You can still hate the thing because of that, but if you still want to get to a thing, change your group. Those are my parting final thoughts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Vishesh, for that insightful talk. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have gained a lot of perspective in this field from your talk. We'll be going ahead to the Q&A session. Feel free to raise your hand to ask any doubts or queries.
Hi, Digisha. Am I audible?
Yep.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, Vishesh, firstly, thank you so much for this talk. I really, really loved it and learned so much from it. I had a small question, actually, like sort of dated before this talk, like about more like your transition from undergrad to your PhD. Because personally, I've just finished my undergrad, and I think I'm in an equivalent stage at this stage, like very confused about what I like and what to go ahead with. So I wanted to ask about your decision-making process and choosing to go ahead with the PhD. Like, what were the push and pull factors? Did you consider doing a master's? How much granularity or clarity did you have in your research area? And how strongly did you weigh the factor of the people that you were going to work with when you chose where to apply?
Oh,
So yeah.
thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Bit. Were you done or more?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. That is, I should have taken notes. There was many questions, but my quickest answer would be that I think I don't know if it is that I am just happy with whatever I get. Nahin, I did an industry internship also, and I think it was less charming and interesting to me than a research internship that I lucked into. I engaged with this professor and I was like, this is cool. I like this abstract thinking of sorts. So I was able to chase that, and because I got 2-3 papers, I was actually planning to do a master's. I knew that I wanted to do education. I felt quite strongly passionate about. And when I was applying, I was fully committed to the idea of I want to do games. Games seems cool because it was like the good intersection of education and technology. And I was still like, technology is the answer to things. So in that spirit, those pieces just lined up. I'd done a research internship. I'd gotten 1 or 2 papers. Whoever I was talking to was like, you have a few papers, so apply for PhD. You can jump out after a master's. So that was going into it. That was actually my plan. I did not have any idea what a PhD is when I started. Even I just blindly applied, mostly because I was like I didn't want to pay. Or whatever family situation, etc. I was like I know that I don't want to pay for a master's. So I applied for PhD. The dream was like if I get a funded master's, but this is the only funded program that I got into. So I was also like, when I got in, I looked up what. I don't think I should speak too poorly. But I did not know much about Wisconsin before I even got the admit. I was just told to apply there. I talked to some people; they seemed pretty cool. I ended up there. And once again, I was incredibly lucky that I ended up with a very good fit with my advisor. Everyone will tell you, and it is incredibly true, that the strongest thing you should pay attention to is fit with the advisor. And not even more like attitude fit more than research interest fit. Like I did not have any sharpness of research interest, and I have swerved heavily because of my courses since. So yeah, a lot of it I would just say is just luck, like the pieces just kept landing together. But I would strongly recommend, if you're considering, you should apply for PhD if you have any kind of a research portfolio, just for just to increase your chance of getting funding. But if you are depending on different departments and schools work differently, different. Some of them allow more changing of advisors, so in that case you don't have to worry that much about the advisor fit. But if it's not one of those departments, then I would. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me. There's so many, you all know so many folks who are doing different kinds of masters and PhD programs in the US. I think any of us are happy to help you figure out how to talk to them.
Thanks so
Does
much.
that? Okay.
Yes, I think that covers all the points, definitely. Thank you.
Awesome.
So, first of all, thank you for such an insightful talk. I never thought in this direction because I was always inclined towards research, but I didn't know this could be a segment where to intervene or to study about. So that's interesting. Secondly, I had this question that so I've been working with this industry. So most of the time, what happens is that I don't know about outside but India. It mostly happens that there's a huge gap between the research and the industry, right? So most of the time they don't have like a proper R&D setup, right? And so even when I was talking to my director, he's not from a design background, he's an entrepreneur. So what happened is he talks about the results, like after the research, what are the results you're coming out and how it will be implemented to the like a bigger crowd to offer. So that time you don't know because you have been developing the whole methodology, the research, and it takes a lot of time and efforts, right? And coming with the results and something which is going to affect a lot of people, you cannot be so sure about like how to implement in terms of the industry benefits, because at the end if they're paying you for the R&D, they want results, something tangible. So how to deal with that first? Then second question is that since the area which you have been researching, right? I know a lot of people have been researching uh, outside India, right? But there's a huge lot of scope in India itself in this domain, especially. So, do you plan to, or like, are people planning? Do people like you plan to actually study about Indian demographic? Because I think there's a huge lot of possibility and opportunities out there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great questions. I'll jump to the second question first because I have lots of concrete information. I know that educational research is burgeoning strongly, especially in the ways that I'm also doing. And I think those would be good pointers for you to connect to. IIT Bombay has a whole department of educational technology. I'm happy to connect you to Chandan Dasgupta is the clearest, like he also did his PhD from Chicago. He's worked in similar fields and we often meet cross paths like once a year or once in 2 years. So those would be people who you can reach out to and see what their work looks like. HBCSC, Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, is another place that is also doing very similar work, and they're doing it in very rich and deep ways. I've been, again, working with a few people from there. Azim Premji University is another good one. So there's like 4 to 5 that I actively know people from, and I'm pretty sure there's like many others that are also doing similar stuff. So yeah, I can send you, if you are email me a few more pointers as to what domains you're thinking of, and I can try to figure out who I could connect you with. And yeah, broadly, my dream is, at least for now, the vision is that longer term to come back. But let's see what happens in life. But relatedly, I think once you start seeing, once you get a chance to read a few of these more qualitative papers, read a few more like theoretical foundational papers, if the tangible there's 2 to 3 different situations I've seen. If it's a bigger company like Google or whatnot, they're happy with any kind of publication. So you can play the game to write whatever kind of paper you want, as long as it like looks positive enough about them. And that also, you can play more complex games to try to criticize their things also, and still have a published paper, which still counts as a thing they would value. If the point of the study is only internal use, like you only want to be, if all the company is demanding is like, give me a white paper to show that the implementation you did worked. Again, I can immediately point to my assessment. I didn't have a screenshot of this, but one of the projects I did with Makerspaces was assessment of learning. And how we did that was that we made a mobile app for people who teach in the Makerspace to just have like a clicker-like thing of, I saw different kinds of interactions happen. So I saw a social interaction of teaching happen. I saw a social emotional support interaction happen. And there's enough research, and also some of calling it enough research is like me talking about how to play the research game, but it's also grounded in our personal beliefs. Like, we do think that a key learning value of Makerspaces is people being able to be nice and friendly with others. If a young kid comes and talks to an older kid who's like, yeah, you're doing great, you're making stuff here, that in itself is a key learning moment, even if the younger kid doesn't physically make stuff. Like, often they get a role model, they get a support or a nudge and this is especially relevant to things like Makerspaces in the US, the ones that I work in especially, they're like library Makerspaces, so there's no specific retention. Often we don't have a promise that this kid will come back. So there is a sincerely reasonable argument to say that this is a good thing to do here. And if you can come up with simply a design of a tool like that or an assessment system like that, those are some ways also that you can make the argument that, like, I made this program, these are counts. Like, we had 100 kids come through within a month, and this is how often this happened. And then you can create your own measuring metrics and make it sound experimental-ish, to be like, let's try this in a new place. Let's do this measurement without an intervention, and then let's do this measurement with an intervention. They're not like p-value studies. You can make them sound like p-value studies if that's what your industry person wants. But like, they're still, I think, sincerely valuable work either way. And I think the key thing is like, see a few DBR papers and you can just start figuring out how to model after them. Did that make more or less some sense?
Yeah. It does make a lot of sense altogether.
Awesome.
Yes, definitely I will connect with you further and we can discuss it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Azan, does your mic work now?
Does it work now?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah. Hey Vishesh, thank you for the talk. It was quite nice. Thank you for taking time to do this. I have a few questions, but I think I'll start with one because I might kind of forget the rest in time. But yeah, I don't know what the sort of audience here is because I personally kind of found out about this talk and thought it was interesting. But I totally get the thing that you were talking about how engineers sort of neglect social sciences and sort of just let go of it completely. And I have seen that working in the industry sort of catches up to you. And definitely I do with time, as I'm also an engineer who is now working with product teams for the most part. And I do see that catching up since you're supposed to be designing for sort of a business use case as well as usability and other stuff like that. I would like to know if you think that there are certain resources. Like when I started to get into like my second year of college, I understood that there's a problem with how I've looked at social sciences so far. I just went through with it and just forgot about it at the end of my exams. And I sort of tried to read up on stuff, at the very least just the newspaper, to try to get an idea of what people think and how people are doing things. Would you say that there are resources? Because I personally think that you can just get lost in books after books. You could just be reading about, you could read like 7 books and you could have like 7 different directions to go through, 7 different topics, but you don't really understand any of them and how they fall into place together. So one of the resources which I found quite nice was like IDC had put up this course on ethnography. And I found it to be quite like it was like they at least had some direction in which they would like take it. Would you say that you know about resources related to social sciences that you would recommend to engineers in general?
I sent out a few links that I felt like were interesting jumping points with respect to design. I think you all put it in that Instagram post and elsewhere. More than that, but I think I was orienting that towards ideally first to someone in a design program, and even then, some of those readings are hard. I sent one Ahmad Ansari piece, which is pretty cool, but it's hard to follow, I think, if you don't have like enough context about what he's talking about. The easiest, I think, that is, again, some kind of a starting point is the Justice-Centered Design Framework from D-School that also I share. It is Justice-Centered, right? Liberatory Design. I always forget the name of this one. We don't have a working chat here, no?
No. If you want to send in a link, you can like just.
It's one of the links that I sent. So, I pointed out 4 to 5. I tried to do, but more than that, if I'm happy to like get separately on a call if you want to give me more context about what you know, what you're interested in thinking about. I could try to figure out what would be relevant. I don't, unfortunately, have something that I would be like, everyone should read this, especially independent of context. Like, I can, again, point to some of the most exciting. If you're doing educational research, I can point to one of the papers that almost hits excitement for almost everyone who reads it for the first time. I didn't send that link. But I can point towards readings like that. But yeah, it is hard. I think some kind of graduate school or so on is key, or finding a book club or something. I would not have managed almost any of these readings if I didn't have to for a course, but I'm very happy that I did.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I actually was going through one of the videos that you shared on the Instagram post, the Ruha Benjamin video. It was quite nice. I went through like 20 minutes of it, and I was really gave me a lot of things to think about at the very least. Thank you so much, Vishesh. It's very kind of you to be encouraging and to let me connect with you. And I will definitely send you an email which is more structured. I don't think I can put my thoughts together on this call. I'm sure I'd want to let other people speak after me. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope everyone's questions have been answered. Thank you, Vishesh, for coming here. It was a wonderful talk. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it and got a lot of insights from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting, and thank you everyone for attending and listening. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me by email. You'll contact me by LinkedIn also. That is also an okay way to reach out. What else? Yeah, good luck with everything. Hopefully, some of these thoughts stick around with any of you. Tell me if you disagree also. I welcome thoughts that are like, you thought this was wrong, and I'd love to hear.
Definitely, Vishesh. And yeah, thank you everybody for showing up. This edition of Tashkil has been a blast, and we hope to see you again next year. Have a good evening.
Bye.
And a good morning to you, Vishesh. Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, Vishesh.
Thank you.